Welcome to Frema Audiobooks, the place where powerful ideas become life-changing habits, where discipline becomes identity, and where ordinary minds learn how to unlock extraordinary levels of clarity, confidence, and emotional strength. Today's audiobook is about one of the most important truths you can ever understand, which is that the quality of your life is deeply connected to the quality of your mind. Because your thoughts shape your emotions shape your actions, and your actions ultimately shape the reality you experience every single day. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Frema Audiobooks. Like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement and mental clarity, and leave a comment below about the biggest mental challenge you are currently trying to overcome. Now relax your mind, take a deep breath, and allow yourself to fully absorb this message. Asterisk. Let's start with part 1. Your mind creates your reality. Most people spend their lives trying to control external situations, without realizing that their inner world influences almost everything they experience. Because the mind acts like a filter through which every event, conversation, challenge, and opportunity is interpreted emotionally, mentally, and psychologically over time. Two people can experience the exact same situation and react completely differently because their minds process reality differently. One person sees failure as proof of weakness while another sees failure as part of growth. One person sees difficulty as punishment while another sees it as preparation. This difference in interpretation changes behavior, and behavior changes outcomes. Which means your life is not shaped only by circumstances, but also by the way your mind interprets those circumstances every single day. The human mind is constantly producing thoughts, emotions, assumptions, fears, memories, expectations, and mental narratives, many of which operate automatically without conscious awareness. Which means that if you do not intentionally take control of your thinking patterns, your mind will eventually begin controlling you through unconscious habits and emotional reactions. Most people never question their thoughts. They assume every feeling is true. They believe every fear automatically deserves attention. And because of this, they become emotionally controlled by mental patterns they never consciously chose. But awareness changes everything. The moment you begin observing your thoughts instead of automatically identifying with them, you create distance between yourself and your emotional reactions. And within that distance, control begins developing gradually. Your mind becomes stronger or weaker, depending on what you repeatedly feed it every single day. Because repeated exposure shapes focus, emotional patterns, beliefs, attention span, confidence, and even the way you perceive yourself and your future over long periods of time without always realizing it consciously. If you constantly feed your mind negativity, distraction, fear, comparison, and emotional chaos, your internal state eventually reflects those influences. But when you intentionally feed your mind discipline, clarity, focus, growth, and meaningful information, your thinking slowly begins changing in ways that affect every part of your life. This is why mental input matters so much. What you watch matters. What you listen to matters. What you repeat internally matters. Because your mind absorbs patterns constantly and eventually begins reflecting whatever it experiences repeatedly over time. One of the greatest dangers in modern life is allowing external noise to dominate your internal state. Because the world constantly competes for your attention, your emotions, your focus, and your energy in ways that gradually weaken your ability to think clearly and remain emotionally grounded during difficult situations. Social media influences emotions. News influences anxiety. Comparison influences self-worth. Endless distraction weakens focus. And over time, many people lose connection with their own thoughts because they are constantly consuming the opinions, emotions, and noise of everyone else around them. This creates mental exhaustion. It creates emotional instability. and it weakens your ability to remain intentional about your own direction in life. This is why controlling your mind requires protecting it carefully from unnecessary negativity and distraction. The thoughts you repeat consistently eventually become beliefs. And beliefs influence decisions more powerfully than temporary emotions ever will. Which means your internal dialogue quietly shapes your confidence, your actions, your relationships, and even the opportunities you believe you deserve in life. If you constantly repeat thoughts of limitation, failure, fear, or inadequacy, your behavior gradually begins aligning with those beliefs whether you realize it or not. The brain always tries to remain consistent with what it believes is true. This is why negative self-talk becomes dangerous when repeated often enough. But positive thinking alone is not enough either. Real transformation happens when disciplined action reinforces healthier beliefs consistently over time until confidence becomes rooted in evidence rather than temporary emotional motivation. Many people lose control of their lives because they never learned how to control their attention. And attention is one of the most valuable forms of power in existence, because whatever consistently holds your attention eventually shapes your emotional state, your priorities, your habits, and your future direction over long periods of time. If your attention constantly moves toward distraction, fear, comparison, and entertainment, your life eventually reflects those patterns. But if your attention focuses consistently on growth, discipline, learning, and meaningful goals, your future changes accordingly. This is why mentally strong people protect their attention carefully. They understand that focus is not just productivity. Focus is direction. And direction ultimately determines the quality of your life over time. Emotional control is another essential part of mastering your mind, because emotions influence perception strongly. And when emotions remain unmanaged, they can distort judgment, weaken discipline, damage relationships, and create impulsive decisions that lead to long-term consequences people later regret deeply. Emotion itself is not weakness. The inability to manage emotion creates problems. Anger can destroy clarity. Fear can stop growth. Anxiety can weaken action. And insecurity can influence decisions in destructive ways. But when you learn how to observe emotions without immediately obeying them, you begin developing emotional intelligence that allows you to respond intentionally instead of reacting impulsively. Every time life becomes uncomfortable or uncertain, your environment also influences your mental state more than most people realize, because the people around you, the conversations you engage in, the information you consume, and the standards you tolerate all affect the emotional and psychological atmosphere your mind operates within every single day. Negative environments drain energy. Toxic relationships weaken confidence. Constant distraction destroys focus. And low standards gradually become emotionally accepted as normal. This is why changing your environment often changes your thinking. Mentally strong people intentionally build surroundings that support growth instead of sabotaging it. They protect their peace carefully. They choose relationships intentionally. And they understand that controlling the mind sometimes requires changing what continuously influences it from the outside. One of the most powerful moments in life happens when you realize that peace does not come from controlling everything around you, but from learning how to remain mentally grounded, regardless of what is happening externally. Because external circumstances constantly change, while inner stability creates strength that remains steady during uncertainty, stress, failure, and emotional difficulty. Most people chase peace externally. They believe success, approval, money, or perfect circumstances will finally make them feel calm internally. But external control is temporary. Real peace comes from emotional regulation. It comes from self-awareness. It comes from disciplined thinking. And it comes from building a mind that remains stable even when life becomes unpredictable and difficult. the moment you begin controlling your mind instead of allowing your mind to control you. Your entire life begins changing gradually because you start making better decisions, responding differently to stress, protecting your focus more intentionally, and approaching challenges with greater emotional stability and mental clarity than before. Your confidence increases. Your discipline improves. Your emotional reactions become healthier. And your sense of direction becomes stronger because your thoughts are no longer completely controlled by fear, distraction, insecurity, or temporary emotions. This is the foundation of personal transformation. Because once the mind changes consistently, behavior changes naturally. And when behavior changes consistently, the world around you eventually begins changing as well. Let's move on to part 2, mastering your thoughts and emotions. Most people underestimate how much control their thoughts have over the direction of their lives. Because thoughts influence emotions, emotions influence behavior. And repeated behavior eventually creates patterns that shape identity, relationships, habits, opportunities, and long-term outcomes over years, without always being noticed consciously in the moment. A negative thought repeated often enough becomes a belief. A belief repeated through action becomes identity. And identity influences future decisions automatically. This is why controlling your mind begins with becoming aware of the thoughts you allow to live inside your head repeatedly every single day. Many people unconsciously rehearse fear, doubt, insecurity, anger, and limitation constantly. Then they wonder why confidence feels weak and progress feels difficult. But the mind cannot produce a healthy life while constantly consuming unhealthy patterns internally. Awareness is the first step toward changing this process intentionally. One of the greatest forms of mental strength is the ability to observe your thoughts without immediately believing every thought your mind produces. Because the human brain naturally creates fears, assumptions, insecurities, emotional reactions, and imagined worst-case scenarios that are often exaggerated or completely disconnected from reality itself. Most people identify with every thought automatically. If the mind says they are failing, they believe it. If the mind predicts disaster, they panic emotionally. If the mind remembers embarrassment, they relive the emotion repeatedly. But emotionally intelligent people learn how to step back mentally and question what their thoughts are telling them. They understand that thoughts are mental events, not always objective truth. This creates emotional distance. And within that distance, self-control becomes possible even during difficult emotional situations. Your emotional state is deeply connected to the quality of your mental habits. Because emotions often follow repeated patterns of thinking, interpretation, focus, and internal meaning that the brain develops gradually over long periods of time through repetition and conditioning. If your mind constantly focuses on problems, negativity, comparison, fear, and limitation, your emotional state eventually reflects those patterns consistently. But if your thinking becomes more intentional, balanced, disciplined, and growth-oriented, your emotional experience begins changing as well. This does not mean ignoring problems or pretending life is always positive. It means refusing to allow negative thinking to dominate your internal world continuously. Emotional balance begins with mental discipline. And mental discipline begins with awareness of what you repeatedly focus on every day. One reason many people struggle emotionally is because they allow temporary feelings to completely control their decisions, reactions, and sense of identity without realizing that emotions constantly change while values, purpose, and long-term goals require stability that goes beyond emotional fluctuation. Some days you will feel strong. Other days you will feel tired. Some moments will bring confidence. Others will bring doubt. But emotionally mature people understand that feelings are temporary experiences rather than permanent definitions of reality. They do not panic every time emotions shift. They learn how to feel emotions without becoming completely controlled by them. This creates emotional resilience. And resilience allows people to continue functioning effectively, even during periods of uncertainty, stress, disappointment, and internal struggle. Fear is one of the strongest emotional forces that influences human behavior. Because fear affects decision-making, confidence, focus, action, and perception in ways that can either protect growth or completely limit it, depending on how it is managed internally over time. Many people allow fear to control their lives without realizing it consciously. Fear of failure prevents action. Fear of rejection prevents connection. Fear of judgment prevents authenticity. And fear of uncertainty prevents growth. But courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the decision to continue despite fear. Mentally strong people feel fear too. The difference is that they refuse to allow fear to become the final authority over their choices and future direction. This mindset changes everything about how challenges are approached. Another important truth is that where your attention goes, your emotional energy eventually follows. Because attention strengthens whatever it repeatedly focuses on, whether that focus involves growth, negativity, fear, gratitude, comparison, discipline, or emotional chaos throughout daily life. If your attention constantly moves toward problems, your stress increases. If your attention constantly moves toward comparison, insecurity grows stronger. If your attention constantly moves toward distractions, focus weakens. This is why controlling attention is one of the most powerful mental skills you can develop. Attention shapes emotional experience. Attention influences priorities. And attention ultimately affects the direction your mind moves toward every single day, whether intentionally or unconsciously. Many people search endlessly for peace externally, without realizing that peace is primarily an internal skill developed through emotional regulation, self-awareness, disciplined thinking, and the ability to remain mentally grounded even when external circumstances become difficult, uncertain, or emotionally painful. External situations will always change. Life will continue presenting unexpected problems. People will disappoint you. Plans will fail. And uncertainty will remain part of the human experience. But inner peace becomes possible when your emotional state stops depending entirely on external control. This does not mean becoming emotionally numb. It means developing stability within uncertainty. It means learning how to protect your mind even when life becomes chaotic around you. And this ability creates tremendous emotional strength over time. Your daily mental habits matter more than occasional moments of motivation, because the brain changes according to repeated exposure, repeated thinking, repeated emotional reactions, and repeated behavioral patterns that eventually become automatic through consistency over long periods of time. This is why small mental habits create powerful long-term effects. Daily gratitude changes emotional focus. Daily discipline strengthens self-control. Daily learning improves thinking. Daily reflection increases self-awareness. And daily emotional regulation improves resilience. The mind becomes whatever it practices repeatedly. This process happens gradually. But over time, repeated mental habits shape personality, emotional stability, confidence, and the overall quality of life in powerful ways that often seem invisible until major transformation has already occurred internally. Controlling your mind also requires learning how to let go of mental patterns that continuously drain your emotional energy. Because resentment, constant overthinking, self-hatred, comparison, regret, and obsessive negativity slowly damage peace, focus, confidence, and emotional stability over long periods of time if left unmanaged. Many people remain mentally trapped in past experiences they cannot change anymore. Others replay painful memories constantly. Some carry anger for years. But mentally strong people eventually realize that protecting inner peace sometimes requires releasing mental burdens that no longer serve growth or healing. Letting go does not mean pretending pain never existed. It means refusing to allow old emotional wounds to permanently control your future mental state and quality of life. The moment you truly begin mastering your thoughts and emotions, you stop reacting to life automatically and start responding intentionally with greater awareness, emotional control, discipline, and wisdom than before, which changes the way you handle pressure, relationships, setbacks, opportunities, and personal growth throughout every area of your life. You become calmer under stress. You become less emotionally reactive. You think more clearly during difficult moments. And you stop allowing temporary emotions to completely dictate permanent decisions. This transformation affects everything. Because once the mind becomes stronger, clearer, and more disciplined, the world around you begins responding differently to the energy, actions, and stability you consistently bring into every situation. Let's move on to part 3, discipline, focus, and inner power. One of the greatest forms of power a human being can develop is the ability to remain focused in a world designed to constantly distract the mind. Because attention has become one of the most valuable resources in modern life, and whatever controls your attention eventually influences your emotions, your decisions, your habits, your relationships, and ultimately the direction your life moves toward over time. Most people allow their focus to be controlled externally. Notifications interrupt concentration. Social media fragments attention. Endless entertainment weakens patience. And constant stimulation trains the brain to avoid silence, boredom, and deep thinking. Over time, the mind becomes restless and emotionally dependent on distraction. This makes discipline harder. It weakens emotional stability. And it reduces the ability to stay committed to meaningful goals that require sustained focus and long-term effort. Mind becomes stronger through intentional challenge. In the same way, the body becomes stronger through physical resistance. Because mental resilience is developed gradually every time you force yourself to stay disciplined, focused, calm, and emotionally stable during situations where your mind naturally wants comfort, escape, distraction, or emotional relief instead. Most people avoid mental discomfort immediately. They escape difficult thoughts. They avoid challenging tasks. They seek instant pleasure whenever stress appears. But this pattern weakens resilience over time. Mentally strong people understand that controlled discomfort builds strength. Every difficult conversation handled calmly improves emotional control. Every distraction resisted strengthens focus. Every challenge completed despite fear increases confidence. And every disciplined action slowly reshapes the mind into something stronger, steadier, and more capable of handling pressure effectively. Self-discipline is not about becoming emotionally cold or denying yourself happiness, but about developing enough control over your impulses that temporary feelings no longer destroy long-term goals, relationships, health, peace, or personal growth through repeated emotional decisions made without awareness or intentional thought. Many people become trapped by impulse. They speak emotionally without thinking carefully. They spend impulsively. They procrastinate repeatedly. They avoid discomfort constantly. And over time, these small, uncontrolled behaviors create larger consequences that eventually shape the quality of life they experience. Discipline interrupts this cycle. It creates pause before reaction. It strengthens intentional behavior. And it allows you to make decisions based on values and long-term vision, instead of temporary emotion or immediate gratification. Another important truth is that your external world often reflects your internal state more than you realize. Because people who constantly live in emotional chaos internally usually create instability externally through poor decisions, unhealthy relationships, inconsistency, avoidance, and reactions driven more by emotion than wisdom or clarity. A distracted mind creates distracted behavior. An angry mind creates conflict. An insecure mind creates fear-based decisions. But a calm and disciplined mind creates stability. It creates better judgment. It creates healthier communication. And it creates consistency that eventually transforms every area of life. This is why inner work matters so much. When your internal state improves, your actions improve. And improved actions slowly change your external reality over time. Many people spend years trying to change their lives without first changing the mental patterns that continue recreating the same behaviors, emotional reactions, and self-destructive habits repeatedly. Because lasting transformation never comes only from external changes, while the mind itself remains conditioned by fear, negativity, insecurity, distraction, or emotional instability. You cannot build a peaceful life with a chaotic mind. You cannot build discipline while constantly feeding distraction. And you cannot create confidence while repeating thoughts of limitation internally every day. Real transformation begins inside first. The mind must change before behavior changes consistently. And behavior must change consistently before life itself begins transforming in meaningful and lasting ways over time. Your standards shape your reality more than your wishes ever will. Because the standards you tolerate emotionally, mentally, and behaviorally eventually become the foundation for how you live, how you work, how you communicate, and what you continue accepting within your environment and relationships every single day. If you tolerate excuses constantly, inconsistency becomes normal. If you tolerate negativity, emotional chaos grows stronger. If you tolerate distraction, focus weakens gradually. But when your standards rise, behavior changes naturally. You begin protecting your time more carefully. You become more intentional with energy. You stop accepting habits that weaken your future. And this shift creates powerful, long-term transformation because standards influence daily decisions continuously. One reason many people never experience their full potential is because they underestimate how powerful consistency becomes over time. Since repeated small actions often create far greater results than occasional bursts of intense motivation that disappear quickly once emotional excitement fades away. Consistency compounds quietly. Daily discipline builds trust. Daily focus strengthens attention. Daily emotional control increases resilience. And daily growth eventually creates results that seem dramatic to people who only notice the outcome without understanding the years of repeated effort behind it. This is why mentally strong people focus less on intensity and more on sustainability. They understand that small disciplined actions, repeated consistently over long periods, become life-changing eventually. There will always be moments where life feels uncertain, emotionally difficult, unfair, or mentally exhausting. Because struggle is part of the human experience and no amount of success, intelligence, or preparation completely removes challenge from life permanently. But mentally strong people respond differently to hardship. They do not allow pain to destroy their identity. They do not allow failure to define their future. And they do not allow temporary setbacks to permanently weaken their sense of direction or purpose. Instead, they adapt. They reflect. They learn. And they continue moving forward even during periods where progress feels slow and emotional pressure feels heavy. This resilience becomes one of the greatest forms of inner power a person can develop. Another important lesson is understanding that peace does not come from controlling everything outside yourself, but from learning how to remain emotionally grounded regardless of external circumstances. Because life constantly changes, while true emotional strength comes from developing stability within uncertainty rather than depending entirely on perfect situations for inner calm and confidence. People often believe peace will finally arrive once problems disappear completely. But life rarely becomes permanently free from difficulty. Instead, peace develops through emotional maturity. It develops through self-awareness. It develops through disciplined thinking and emotional regulation. And it develops when you stop allowing every external situation to completely control your internal state and emotional balance. The moment you truly learn how to control your focus, discipline your thoughts, manage your emotions, and protect your inner peace intentionally every single day, you begin developing a level of mental strength that changes not only the way you experience life, but also the way you influence the world around you through your actions, decisions, energy, and presence. You become more stable under pressure. You become more intentional in relationships. You stop reacting impulsively to every emotional trigger. And you begin approaching life with greater clarity, wisdom, and confidence than before. This transformation is powerful because once the mind becomes disciplined and emotionally grounded, the external world gradually begins reflecting the strength, stability, and direction that now exists within you. Thank you for listening to Fremma Audiobooks and spending this time strengthening your mind, your focus, and your emotional power, because the moment you learn how to control your thoughts, discipline your emotions, and protect your inner peace, you begin transforming every area of your life from the inside out in ways that most people never fully realize until it is too late. Always remember that your mind can either become your greatest strength or your greatest limitation, depending on what you repeatedly feed it. Focus on and allow to control your daily actions and decisions. If this audiobook inspired you in any way, make sure to subscribe to Fremma Audiobooks, like this video. Share it with someone who needs encouragement and mental clarity. And leave a comment below about the biggest lesson you learned from this audiobook, because your support helps this message reach more people around the world who are working to build stronger minds and better lives.